I thought Ridge Valley would be my refuge. A barn, a few acres, a place to finally build something that was mine. But before the paint was even dry, she came, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding a smile that wasn't friendly. She called herself the president of the HOA, and from the moment she set foot on my soil, I knew she hadn't come to welcome me. She'd come to break me. Ethan Cole had poured years of sweat and sacrifice into owning his land. At 43, he wasn't chasing luxuries. He wanted permanence, soil beneath his boots that carried his name, a barn he could point to and say, "That's mine." On the edge of Ridge Valley, where suburban streets bled into desert fields, his farm sat like a stubborn reminder that not everything had to look the same. Rows of soil stretched out behind a sturdy timber barn, the air filled with the scent of tilled earth. To Ethan, it was more than property. It was his dream, his father's lessons come alive. Work the land with respect, and it will carry you forward. But across the street, someone saw only disruption. Her name was Margaret Kane, and she wore the title President of the Ridge Valley HOA, like armor. Neighbors knew her reputation. Sunglasses on even after sunset, clipboard tucked under one arm, always ready with a citation that looked official but rarely held weight. From the moment Ethan moved in, Margaret's eyes never left him. Not curious, not welcoming, calculating, like she was waiting for him to step out of line. The first week, she crossed the road, heels crunching against gravel, and stopped in front of his tractor. "Why do you have so much equipment sitting out?" she asked, her voice clipped. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. "Because I'm farming. This land isn't HOA property. The county signed off on everything before I bought it." Her lips pressed thin. "Every home in Ridge Valley affects the others. Barns, livestock, machinery. It gives the wrong impression." Neighbors' curtains twitched. A man lingered too long at his mailbox watching. Ethan kept his voice steady. "I didn't buy this place to decorate your view. I bought it to work." Margaret scribbled furiously on her clipboard, the scratch of her pen like a warning. That was the moment Ethan understood. This wasn't about rules. It was about power. The weeks that followed proved it. She slowed her SUV when driving past his fence line, glaring through tinted glass. At neighborhood meetings, she dropped hints about eyesores and property values. And Ethan heard the stories whispered in town. The Carsons, told to replace their curtains because the color clashed with the neighborhood palette. A teenage boy's basketball confiscated for bouncing it past 9 o'clock. Another couple fined for non-compliant landscaping. Fines that turned out to be nothing more than Margaret's printed letters. Each story ended the same. Shoulders slumped. Whispers of "just pay it, don't make it worse." Ethan tried to keep his focus. Farming was already backbreaking, sunup to sundown. But it was hard to shake the feeling of being watched. Every time he stepped onto his porch, her presence lingered like a shadow across the street. One evening, with cicadas humming in the dusk, Ethan sat with a glass of iced tea, scrolling through his phone. His sister Hannah had sent a text. "How's the new place? Settling in, okay?" He typed a reply, paused, deleted it. He wanted to tell her about Margaret, about the notes that kept appearing in his mailbox, about neighbors glancing at him like he didn't belong. Instead, he sent, "I'll be fine," because that's what Ethan believed. He'd fought harder battles than a neighbor with a clipboard, or so he thought. The next morning, as dawn burned over Ridge Valley, Ethan was hauling sacks of feed when he heard sharp footsteps crunching over gravel. He turned. Margaret was marching toward him, shoulders squared, sunglasses gleaming in the early light, as if she were heading into court. "We need to talk," she called, her tone carrying more command than courtesy. Ethan leaned against the cart. "Good morning to you too." She ignored it, stabbing her finger toward his barn. "That structure violates community standards. It's oversized and was never approved." Ethan pulled off his gloves. "This isn't your jurisdiction. My permits are county-issued, all legal." Her chin lifted. "Every property influences the neighborhood's value. Barns, tractors, This isn't what families want to see when they drive through Ridge Valley. Neighbors were watching again. Curtains shifting. A man at the mailbox pretending to check the post twice. Ethan felt the eyes, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm not here to lower anyone's value," he said. "I'm here to work the ground I paid for." Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough for her words to carry. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Cooperate, and it ends peacefully. Refuse, and I'll escalate." Ethan's jaw tightened. Escalate to what? You don't have authority here. For the first time, her composure cracked. Just a flicker, a twitch of her jaw. She cleared her throat. "This isn't personal. It's about standards." "It feels personal," Ethan said. Her silence lasted only a beat before she spun on her heel and marched back toward her house. But her last words floated over her shoulder, cold and deliberate. "You'll regret being difficult." Ethan stood in the growing heat of dawn, hands gripping the cart handle. It wasn't just the word regret that stuck with him. It was the way she said it. And he knew then. This wasn't over. Ethan told himself not to give weight to Margaret's threat. Words were cheap, and he'd been warned enough times in life to know most people never followed through. But Margaret Kane was not most people. Her silence afterward didn't feel like surrender. It felt like calculation. 3 days later, an envelope appeared in his mailbox. No return address. No HOA letterhead. Just a single typed page. Notice of violation. Unauthorized structure. Non-compliance. Fine. $500. At first, Ethan laughed. He carried it into the kitchen, tossed it onto the table, and shook his head. But the laughter faded when he remembered what he'd heard from the Carsons. How they paid a fine to keep her from making it worse. Fake citations. Real money. He crushed the letter in his fist and threw it into the trash. That evening, while the sun bled into the horizon, a pickup truck slowed at the edge of his driveway. 2 men sat inside, strangers. They didn't wave, didn't smile. They just stared at the barn for a long beat before rolling on. The next morning, Ethan found tire tracks carved across his field. A deliberate curve that stopped just short of the barn doors. Coincidence? Maybe. But his gut told him otherwise. He drove into town with his permits and papers stacked in a folder. At the sheriff's office, Deputy Morales leafed through them slowly, nodding. "You're clean," Morales said. "Your land's zoned right. HOA's got no authority out there, so if she keeps pushing," Ethan asked. The deputy shrugged. "Document everything. If it crosses into threats or property damage, we'll act. For now, it's just neighbor disputes." The phrase gnawed at him. Neighbor disputes. Easy to say when you weren't the one being circled like prey. That weekend, Ethan tried another approach. He invited neighbors over for a cookout. Nothing fancy, just burgers sizzling on the grill, a cooler filled with cold drinks. He hoped that if people saw him as more than the man with the barn, they might stop buying into Margaret's shadow campaign. A few came. The Rileys brought potato salad. Mrs. Collins arrived with a pie. They chatted politely, and for a moment it felt almost normal. Children played tag across the lawn, laughter lifting into the evening air. But eyes still darted toward Margaret's house. She was there, of course, watering plants that didn't need watering, sunglasses hiding her gaze. "She's been at this for years," Mrs. Collins whispered to Ethan as they stood by the fence. "Picks a target and makes life miserable until they give in or move. Most of us, we just try to keep our heads down." "Why?" Ethan asked quietly. "Because it's easier," she said. Her eyes flicked toward Margaret. "She doesn't stop." Ethan looked back at the children running barefoot through the grass, at neighbors smiling nervously as if afraid to be seen enjoying themselves. Easier, he thought, but only for her. As twilight settled, Margaret made her move. She strode to the edge of his fence, clipboard in hand, voice sharp enough to slice through the evening. "Gatherings of this size require prior HOA approval," she announced. The laughter died at once. Chairs scraped against the ground. The atmosphere shifted like a storm cloud rolling in. Ethan stepped forward. "This isn't an HOA event. This is my property, my grill, my neighbors. Margaret's smile was thin, venom behind the curve of her lips. And another violation. I'll be filing it. The Rileys exchanged uneasy glances. Mrs. Collins muttered something about heading home before dark. One by one, guests drifted away, their goodbyes awkward and rushed. The cookout evaporated into silence. Margaret lingered at the fence line, watching Ethan smother the last embers of the coals. Her sunglasses caught the firelight reflecting it back at him. She didn't need to speak. Her triumph was written in her smirk as she turned and walked back across the street. Ethan stood alone in the cooling night, fists tight at his sides. This was no longer about barns or permits. It was about control. The next week, more letters arrived. Another notice of violation claimed his machinery blocked emergency access. One accused him of using unapproved fencing materials. Each more absurd than the last, Ethan ignored them. But ignoring didn't erase the weight. Every day, he felt the neighborhood holding its breath, waiting for what Margaret would do next. Then, one morning, he found the barn door ajar. He was certain he had locked it. Inside, the sight stopped him cold. A feed sack slashed open, grain spilling across the floor like sand. Tools scattered. A shovel bent as though someone had stomped on it. Heat rose in his chest. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was sabotage. He stormed across the street and hammered on Margaret's door. She opened it slowly, leaning against the frame, smirk already waiting. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice dripping false sweetness. "You stay off my land," Ethan growled. "You or anyone working for you. Step foot on my property again, and I'll have the sheriff here before you can blink." Margaret tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Such hostility. I'd hate for the community to think you're dangerous." Ethan leaned closer, his voice low, steady. "The community already knows who's dangerous." Her smile faltered just for an instant. Then the door swung shut, leaving Ethan staring at his own reflection in the glass. He turned back toward his barn, fists trembling at his sides. This wasn't a feud anymore. It was war. The nights grew long after that standoff at Margaret's porch. Ethan lay awake in bed, every creak of the barn carried on the wind, every crunch of gravel sounding like a warning. Silence itself felt weaponized. Heavy, deliberate. By the third sleepless night, even Hannah noticed. She stopped by early, catching him hunched over a mug of cold coffee at the kitchen table. "You look like you've been fighting ghosts," she said softly. Ethan tried to laugh, but it came out flat. "Feels like it. She won't quit, Hannah. She wants me broken." She reached for his hand. "Then don't give her what she wants." But Margaret wasn't letting up. The pressure shifted, becoming less visible but sharper. Whispers floated through Ridge Valley like smoke. Neighbors who once nodded in greeting now avoided his eyes. Some even crossed the street when he came walking their way. Margaret's new weapon was rumor, and she wielded it with precision. Then came the word of the meeting. Ethan hadn't been invited. But Mr. Riley, glancing nervously over his shoulder, whispered it to him anyway. "HOA meeting tonight. You're on the agenda." The clubhouse smelled of stale coffee and folding chairs. Every seat was filled, every gaze hardening as Ethan walked in. And at the front, like a queen on her throne, sat Margaret Kane. Clipboard poised, posture regal, smile cold. She tapped the microphone once. "Neighbors, we are here to discuss threats to our property values. Threats to our way of life. It begins with those who refuse to respect our community standards." She never said his name. She didn't have to. Heads shifted toward him, whispers stirred like dry leaves in the wind. Ethan rose slowly. "My land isn't under your jurisdiction." The county confirmed it. "You know that." Margaret's grin widened like a trap snapping shut. "Jurisdiction doesn't matter when one man's choices drag us all down. This is about respect." Ethan barked a bitter laugh. "Respect? You broke into my barn. You destroyed my tools. That's not respect. That's criminal." Gasps rippled through the room. Some neighbors stared at the floor, others at Margaret. She didn't flinch. "Baseless accusations," she said evenly. "And slander has consequences." That was the moment Ethan understood. She didn't just want compliance. She wanted humiliation. She wanted him crushed in front of everyone. He walked out before the vote, their murmurs chasing him into the night. The next morning, a paper was taped to his door. Final notice: cease construction or face legal consequences. The words burned through him. He pictured Margaret typing it in the dark, smirking as the printer spat it out. By evening, his anger needed somewhere to go. He grabbed a bent shovel and began digging at the edge of his field. He didn't need a hole. He needed the rhythm, the sound of earth breaking, something to strike against. Headlights cut across the land. A black SUV pulled up just short of the fence line, its engine growling low. Ethan froze, shovel in hand, sweat dripping into his eyes. The window rolled down. A stranger leaned out, sunglasses hiding his gaze, though the sun had long since set. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Margaret asked us to keep an eye on things." Ethan's grip tightened on the shovel. "Tell Margaret if she comes near my land again, she better bring the sheriff with her." The man chuckled, slow and mean. "Careful, farmer. Land can be dangerous after dark. Accidents happen." The SUV rolled away, taillights glowing like embers as they disappeared into the horizon. That night, Ethan hardly blinked. Every shadow stretched longer than it should. Every rustle outside made his chest seize. By morning, he knew he couldn't fight this battle alone anymore. He drove into town with a stack of papers in the passenger seat. At the law office, a man named Harris spread them across his desk. Permits, violation letters, photos of the damage. He read each one carefully, frowning deeper with every detail. Finally, Harris looked up. "She has no legal ground, none. But she has persistence. And persistence is dangerous. I'll file a cease and desist. It'll put her on notice. But—" he leaned forward. "Oh, be prepared. She won't like it." Ethan nodded, jaw set. She already made that clear. When he got home, Hannah was waiting on the porch. She studied his face before asking, "Any luck?" He sat beside her, shoulders heavy. "Legal luck, maybe. But this isn't about paperwork. It's about who bends first. And I won't." Her eyes softened but carried a warning. "Then you'd better brace yourself. Because she's coming," and Ethan knew. Hannah was right. Margaret wasn't retreating. She was only changing her aim. The cease and desist went out on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, Ethan knew it had landed. Margaret didn't storm across the road or bang on his door. She was too smart for that. Instead, she shifted gears, her tactics sharpening into something colder. The first sign was the SUV. It returned at dusk, idling at the corner of Ridge Valley like a vulture. Ethan spotted it through his window, headlights carving lines into the fading light. The vehicle never rolled onto his land, never crossed the fence. It just sat there, humming, patient, watching. The second sign came in the mail. He pulled the envelopes from the box and found one already torn open, sloppily taped shut. Bills missing pages, a receipt ripped in half. Nothing obvious enough to prove tampering, just enough to gnaw at his sense of safety. The third came late at night. A knock at the door, sharp, deliberate. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and opened it to nothing but empty air. The gravel shimmered with fresh tire tracks leading away into the dark. He barely slept. Each morning, he walked the property line like a soldier, boots crunching frost, shovel in hand like a rifle. He told himself he wasn't scared, but fear seeped through anyway. No lock, no fence, no bolt could keep it out. By Saturday, Hannah stopped pretending. She caught him pacing the living room, curtains pulled tight. "You can't live like this," she said firmly. "You're letting her win." "I'm not letting her anything," Ethan snapped, then softened. I can't keep looking over my shoulder forever." Her gaze didn't waver. "Then stop being alone. Bring the neighbors in. She can't isolate you if you refuse to be isolated." Ethan thought of the meeting, of their silence, of how quickly heads had turned away. But he also remembered the flicker of shame in some of their eyes, the whisper of a warning from Mr. Riley when he didn't have to. Maybe there was something left to salvage. That evening, he tried. He walked next door to Mrs. Hall's house. She opened the door cautiously, flour dusting her apron, eyes darting past him toward the street. "She's been telling people you're dangerous," Mrs. Hall whispered before he could even speak. "That you threatened her. That you've lost control." Ethan clenched his jaw. "And do you believe that?" Tears welled in her eyes. "No, but others might. And if enough people believe it, that's all it takes." One by one, he knocked on doors. Some shut fast. Others cracked open just enough for wary eyes. A few listened. Mr. Riley nodded, slow and steady. The Parkers shuffled awkwardly, then admitted they'd seen Margaret near his fence line late at night. Slowly, threads began to pull together. It wasn't victory, but it was something. 2 nights later, the storm broke. Ethan was half asleep when the alarm from the barn shrieked through the night. He bolted upright, boots on before his mind caught up, and sprinted across the yard with the flashlight beam cutting the dark. The barn door swung wide, groaning against the wind. Inside, the sharp sting of gasoline filled his lungs. A red can lay on its side, a rag half-soaked beside it, shoved near the stack of lumber he'd been saving. One spark, one flick of a match, and months of sweat and sacrifice would have gone up in flames. Ethan staggered back into the yard, chest heaving, and then he saw her. Margaret stood at the fence line, sunglasses gleaming even in the dark, flanked by 2 men in polo shirts. She didn't run. She didn't flinch. She only smiled, slow and venomous. "You're insane," Ethan shouted, voice raw. "You could have burned the whole place down." She tilted her head, voice low and mocking. "Accidents happen." He raised the flashlight, its beam slicing across her face. "You're finished, Margaret. I've got proof now." Her smile faltered just for a moment before it snapped back in place. She leaned closer to the fence. "You think anyone will take your word over mine? You're a drifter, a loner. I am the community." Ethan's hand shook on the flashlight. For the first time, he realized she wasn't just playing games. She was ready for war. Behind him, Hannah's voice cracked through the night. "The sheriff's on the way." He hadn't even noticed her phone in her hand. But the wail of sirens was already rising, red and blue lights flickering against the distant trees. Margaret's men shifted nervously, their bravado thinning. Margaret stepped back, her face unreadable. "This isn't over," she hissed. Then she and her shadow slipped into the SUV, the engine roaring as it tore away into the dark. Ethan stood there in the yard, chest heaving, knuckles white around the flashlight. The barn loomed behind him, heavy with the smell of gasoline. Hannah rushed to his side, gripping his arm. "We're not safe," she whispered. Ethan's jaw set, his voice low and steady. "No, but she made her mistake tonight. She showed her hand, and I'm not going to let her burn us down." The sirens drew closer, lights flashing like false dawn. And for the first time, Ethan knew. He wasn't just a man defending his farm. He was a soldier in a war Margaret had declared. And the reckoning was only beginning. The deputies arrived fast, their cruisers skidding to a halt on gravel, beams of red and blue painting the barn like firelight. Ethan stood at the fence, still gripping the flashlight as if it were a weapon. Deputy Morales was first out of the car. He scanned the scene, eyes falling on the tipped gas can, the rag, the black stains in the dirt. "You did the right thing calling us," Morales said. Ethan's voice cracked with fury. She was here, Margaret and her men. "You just missed them." Morales crouched, touched the rag with a pen, then glanced up. "This is attempted arson. If you've got witnesses, we can move quickly." Hannah stepped forward, her face pale but steady. "I saw her. I saw everything." Her words landed with a weight heavier than evidence bags. Hannah had always wanted roses and peace, not confrontation. For her to stand here now, unshaken, was proof of how far Margaret had pushed them. The yard filled with flashing lights, officers jotting notes, photographing the spilled grain, bagging the rag. Neighbors emerged from their porches, faces lit by curiosity and dread. Whispers carried across Ridge Valley. Some pointed, some frowned, but all of them saw the truth now. By dawn, Ethan's land felt less like a home and more like a case file. Deputies promised to pursue charges, to hold Margaret accountable. Still, her parting words echoed. This isn't over. Days stretched into weeks. Silence returned, but it wasn't the enemy anymore. It was relief. The SUV no longer lingered. No fake notices appeared. No knocks at night. Margaret had vanished. But Ethan knew better than to believe she was gone. People like her didn't disappear. They regrouped. Then came the hearing. The courthouse filled to capacity, every seat taken. Neighbors, county officials, reporters drawn by the whispers of a neighborhood feud turned war. Margaret entered in a pressed blazer, sunglasses dangling from her pocket like a trophy. She smiled at the crowd as if she were hosting a gala. But when the judge read the charges, trespassing, harassment, vandalism, attempted arson, her smile twitched. Just barely, Ethan testified. Hannah testified. Mrs. Hall, Mr. Riley, the Parkers, they all stepped forward, voices unsteady at first, then growing louder with each account. Every testimony stacked another brick in the wall against her. Margaret shifted in her chair but kept her mask intact. The clipboard queen stripped of her crown. When the testimonies ended, the judge's voice cut like steel. This court will not tolerate the abuse of authority, real or imagined. Margaret Kane, you are hereby fined, placed under probation, and banned from serving on or interfering with any homeowners association. Any further harassment, and you will face jail time. For the first time, her composure cracked, just for a second. But the second was enough. Outside, reporters swarmed, neighbors clustered in tight knots of relief. Hannah squeezed Ethan's hand. "It's over," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No, it's bigger than her. We let silence keep us small. That ends now." That night, the neighborhood transformed. The Parkers hosted a gathering in their driveway. Folding chairs lined up, tables spread with homemade dishes, kids drawing chalk patterns across the pavement. Laughter, real laughter, filled the air for the first time in months. Ethan hung back, watching. Hannah nudged him. "Go on," she urged, so he stepped forward. "We all came here for peace," he said. Heads turned, faces softening. But peace isn't silence. Silence is what bullies use to keep us apart. Margaret didn't build authority. She built fear. And fear only works if we stand alone. Nods rippled through the crowd. Even those who once turned away now leaned closer. "We've seen what happens when we speak up," Ethan continued. "We've seen what happens when we stand together. This community is ours. Not hers, not anyone else's. From here on out, we protect it together." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then steady. Ethan felt something inside him loosen. A weight he'd been carrying since the day Margaret's sunglasses flashed across his fence line. Later that night, he and Hannah sat on the porch swing. The cicadas hummed, sprinklers clicked down the street, and for the first time, the sound wasn't heavy with dread. It was just life. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think she'll try again?" Ethan exhaled, eyes on the stars edging through the trees. "Maybe, but she won't win. Not anymore. We know who we are now, and that's stronger than anything she can throw at us." The roses swayed in the evening breeze, their petals glistening in the porch light. Hannah reached out, touched one gently, her fingers tracing its bloom. "Peace," she whispered. Ethan smiled. Peace we earned. For years he had thought quiet was enough. But Hollow Creek had taught him the harder truth. Peace isn't given. It's defended. It's shared. It's built on neighbors who stop looking away, on voices that rise when one alone isn't enough, on the stubborn refusal to bow when someone tries to break you. He looked at his wife, her face lit with quiet strength, and knew it in his bones. They were home, and home was worth every fight.